I'm Avery with Clay Revolution, and today we're going to be talking about setting CZs. First, we're going to be getting out the supplies that we need. So I have a texture mat, my gauges, a roller, as well as some little cubic zirconias, which we will talk about setting and different ways that you can set CZs. You can find all of these supplies on our website, clayrevolution.com. And feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to help if you need help on your journey. Other tools that you'll need will be some liberation spray to help get your piece out of the mold better, as well as some sanding equipment, some tweezers, and a fine awl. Other helpful equipment are little mini circle cutters, which have multiple different uses, as well as some little embeddable eyelets. These ones are fine silver, so we can fire these with our torch. Here's the CZ that we're going to be working with today. And the first thing we're going to do is roll across our gauges. We want to see if our CZ will get stuck, kind of like what happened here, or if we'll be able to roll seamlessly over the CZ. That will tell us the depth that we need to roll our clay to make sure that it's deep enough to be able to hold our cubic zirconia. If needed, you can also stack gauges, but first just go through the different gauges and see which one works best for the project that you're working on. I found that the pink gauges worked best for me, so that's what I'll be using to roll my clay to 2 millimeters thick. If you haven't used Project X before, it's different than other metal clays, so you need to work your clay to activate the binder's elasticity. We have a video up on both our YouTube as well as our website, so you can find that information, but basically all that you'll be doing is rolling your clay a few times, folding it into itself until it gets this smooth texture. People will often mistake our clay as dry, so as long as you do this, you'll be in good shape to be able to work with your clay. All it needs is a little bit of preparation first. I have my gauges stacked where they're about 2.5 millimeters deep for a CZ that I'll be setting. This is where your mini circle cutters come in. Once you get the depth that you need, you can go ahead and cut out a little circle. And I like to use these circle cutters and put them over my cubic zirconia, so that way I can see if it will fit around it good and leave a little bit of extra space, so that way then I can use this as the setting for my CZ. Once you have your piece, you can go ahead and put your cubic zirconia upside down and try to get your piece centered onto it, then press down gently once you feel it like you're centered. This is an area where if you have a little bit of extra clay, it could come in handy, because then you're always able to sand down if you get a little bit off center with your setting. But we'll talk more about that later. Another handy tip is if you have cracks in your cubic zirconia setting, then what you can do is use a little bit of water, putting it on something like a brush, and just brush the cracks to where they start to fill in. You'll see us do that here, and notice how it really smooths out that texture around the edges, as well as the back. This part can be a little bit time consuming, so just do it until it's to a level that you like. Something that I also found helpful was using a little bit of paste to fill in some of those larger cracks, or tiny bits of clay that you can kind of work into those edges to give it a nice clean finish. Another method to secure your CZ is by making prongs. You can do this a couple of different ways. This example here was done with a syringe, which has 999 fine silver clay. You can also get this online. And it comes with 3 different tips for your syringe. I have 2 of them here, so you can determine how thick you want your clay to be. You'll want to go over the top of your stone and pull towards the edges, but we'll talk about that deeper at another time. This is an example that was prongs pulled with some tweezers. So for these, we just use tweezers, but you can also use an embossing tool, which we'll show an example of later. But you'll just pull some of the clay to where it's starting to cover your stone slightly, which just helps to ensure that it doesn't pop out whenever your clay is shrinking. However you choose to set your stone is up to you, but once it's dried, you can go ahead and start the sanding steps. We like to use files as well as some 3M foam pads, which are also great for sanding. These come in a few different grits, so you can pick whichever one works best for your project. The sanding process can take a while because ideally you'd want your edge of your piece to be about half the size of the total width of your stone. So for this piece, we still have quite a ways to go since the edge is about comparable to the size of our stone that we have in the center. So we'll just be working on this for a little while before just setting it aside to be attached to a piece later and fired. Small intricate pieces can be a little bit difficult to sand. So after you get them smoothed up as best as you can with your file, you can go ahead and work with your foam pads, working a little bit slower and just trying to be careful as you're going around those edges. But here is this finished piece. So we have it all filed down and ready to be fired. But first, let's prep the bezel that we're going to be setting it in. I start by adding some liberation spray so I know that my clay will come up nice and easy, as well as our 2mm gauges, since that's the depth that I need for this piece. After rolling your clay, you're going to go ahead and take it off of your texture mat and start to cut around your shape to be able to get down to just your design. A tip for doing this process would be to cut the larger chunks of clay off first, so you can store them in a bag to the side so it doesn't dry out on you before you work on those nitty-gritty fine details. We recommend cutting your clay on a Teflon mat because it makes it easier to transport to your warmer if you're using one, and it also makes a nice rotatable surface so you're able to cut your piece with more ease. Now we're going to get ready to set our CZ. First, we're going to add some water to our piece and to the back of our CZ and press it in. And I am using my tweezers to just help reinforce it. My bezel that holds the CZ is completely dry at this point, and of course the piece that we just rolled is still wet. So I get it embedded really good before putting it on the warmer, because that will help keep it in place. And I'm going to go ahead and add in one of our little eyelets. So the direction that you put the eyelet in, so whether it is flat like it is here or if it's turned to the side, will differ whether you're making earrings or a necklace. For example, for earrings, you'd want it to be flat on like how it is right here, because then you can put the hook in without having to add any extra jump rings or any other hardware. Whereas for a necklace, you would want to have it rotated where you could put the necklace strand through the hole right off the bat. While we get this on the warmer, we're going to talk a little bit about making prongs and walk through a step together. So as you can see, it's not completely even right now, but I'll be able to sand it and work on that after the fact. And having a little bit of that extra clay can be sometimes helpful if you're smearing it with water to try to get rid of cracks. Then you have a little bit of extra material to work off of and turn into paste to smooth out your clay. What I'm doing here is using an embossing tool and gently pulling over my cubic zirconia So that way it gets locked into place a little bit and just adds a little extra support, so that way whenever our clay is shrinking, it can help keep that cubic zirconia from popping out on us. The finished product a little bit closer so you can see. We did some smoothing, but it'll still need a little bit of sanding after it dries. And speaking of dries, we now have our next piece. So what we just put on the warmer a few minutes ago is ready to sand. This took about an hour to dry completely because of being a thick piece. I wanted to give it some extra time, but you'll be able to decide how long your piece will need to dry based on the thickness of it, as well as whether you're using any other tools such as a warmer, like what we used. This is the time-consuming process again of sanding, starting with our file and working down to our foam pads, going around those curves and being careful since this is the most fragile state for our clay. Make sure you use something to catch the little silver clay particles so you can turn it into paste or hold on to it to be able to use it at a later time. And after you're done sanding, we are ready for the firing step. You want to start with having your piece on a fire brick. The reason you want to use a fire brick instead of a regular brick is because these disperse the heat. If you use a regular brick, your piece may melt because all that heat will be concentrated right underneath where your silver piece is, instead of being dispersed throughout the whole brick, which can cause it to go over silver clay's melting point, which is roughly 1750 degrees Fahrenheit. The temperature that we like to get our clay up to is 1650 for about 2 minutes. Once your piece of clay catches on fire, it's the binder burning out. Whenever this stage happens, back your butane torch up a little bit, so that way you don't suffocate the oxygen and accidentally put out the flame, letting the flame die off naturally, as that means your binder has burned out and you can begin the sintering process. This is where we can see change in our piece as it'll visibly begin to shrink to some degree, as well as change to that kind of light orangey color. I like to use a fire brick to flatten it, and I'm putting it on a different fire brick so it can cool down. You don't want to quench CZs, so just move it around on your fire brick and let it cool naturally. Once it's done cooling, you can go ahead and get working on your polishing steps. We're using a polishing wheel today, and you can also get this from Clay Revolution. Typically, you would want to use 2 hands for this step and work your piece in a little bit of a circling motion. I'm doing it this way so that we can see a little bit better, but if you do small circles when polishing your piece, then you can be sure that the grain is going similar directions and it's more of a buffing effect where it doesn't leave any sort of streaks or lines. But I'll be cleaning it up at higher grits where it'll be shined up without any of those lines that I may be causing right now because of not making those tiny circles. I figured it was more important for you to see this part than see my hand. So once you're done with your white wheel, you'll move on up to the brown wheel, continuing through the grits until it reaches its prime shine, which is up to your own discretion. This is what our piece looked like by the end today. We hope that you enjoyed this video and that you found it helpful, but feel free to message us if you need any help with advice, setting CZs, anything particular pertaining to Project X and using our brand of metal clay. Just know that we're here to help. Feel free to reach out anytime that you need, and thank you so much for watching. Check out our website for more metal clay firing tips.